It's about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
Well, hey, this is Pastor Alyn Waller of the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, and I want to thank you for joining me for this conversation with the Reverend Dr. Franklyn W. Franklyn Richardson of the Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York. He is the pastor of the Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York, and the author of Witness to Grace. This is a fantastic work that I think young and old, male and female, ministers and lay people need to read and consider as you are shaping your thoughts about ministry and shaping your thoughts about life. And so I'm grateful to introduce you to Brother Beloved. I've grown up in the National Baptist Convention, and you cannot be in the National Baptist Convention and not know the name W. Franklyn Richardson. So, Doc, welcome, and thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you for hosting me, Brother Waller. You have provided an excellent example of what ministry ought to be going into the 21st century. And so I'm delighted to be hosted by you.
Well, I'm grateful. Just very quickly, it was almost 27 years ago, and Dr. Isaac Green, who was the pastor of the Central Baptist Church, went home to be with the Lord, and you came in town along with Dr. Jemison to eulogize. I believe Dr. Jemison eulogized, and you were there and played a significant role in his homegoing. Dr. Green was very, very fond of young preachers. In fact, he is the reason I am here in Philadelphia now. And the fact that I was allowed to be a part of picking you up from the airport is something I hold on to as a signal moment in my life. And so the next moment is this moment that I get to be a part of a cadre of comrades who are pushing and helping to push this work, Witness to Grace. Would you tell us a little bit about what it is and why you wrote it?
Before that, let me just chime in with you on Isaac Green, one of the finest preachers I've ever known. He was a mentor to me. While I was general secretary, he was the treasurer of the convention.
That's right.
He was such a nurturing brother. I shall never forget him. He has sacred space in my mind, and I'm glad you brought him up. Well,
yes, sir.
The book emerged after many years of reflection. You know, I've been pastoring now for more than 50 years. And I thought as I was coming to these days, I thought that I needed to, I talked to so many young pastors, and so many young pastors have come and asked me to be a mentor or to engage. And I found that I had not as much time or accessibility because I'm very engaged in my ministry, but I needed to share with them my journey. So one of the premises, one of the driving forces was that I wanted to share my perspective with my colleagues. Also, it's an opportunity for me to reflect on how God has blessed my life in spite of the ups and downs, and to acknowledge that his grace was operative, and that to encourage others to see grace in their lives, the functioning of grace in their lives. And so I had a major surgery, And I've overcome it 3 years ago now. But it was all of that. I felt an urgency to put this to pen. I didn't want my journey to close without making this statement. And so I began after that to write the book. Amazingly, I wrote the book on my cell phone with my thumb, one thumb. And I wrote the book over 12 months, on planes and back in the car, in the middle of the night, everywhere. I would write it and rewrite it. And then finally I would send chapters to the publisher, and they would go over it and make sure it was all good. And I finished it. And it began, and I began really was an exercise of reflection on my journey, and the thing that I felt was dominant in whatever I have achieved, whatever has happened to me, has been the grace of God. And I wanted to share that. As Paul says in that opening line, but for the grace of God, I am that I am that I am. And so it is in that humbling posture I want to offer this story. It begins in your town, the city of Philadelphia, and the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. The Lord allowed the shades of light to come into my life. And I was born in that city, grew up there for 12 till I was 17. Went to West Philadelphia High School, and one of the first instances of grace when I look back, you go forward in faith, anticipating the journey before. It can be filled with hope, but it's a faith walk to go into the future, and it's into the darkness because it's unknown. But grace is something you can only see when you look back over your shoulder and see where God has brought you from and how you've made it over. And so for me, this was an attempt to look over my shoulder and to acknowledge that it wasn't my hard work, it wasn't how smart I was, it wasn't how connected I was, it wasn't none of that. All of it was God's fingerprint expressed on my journey, and me given opportunity because he provided it. I deeply believe that. And I think if people look through the prism of grace, they can see how all of us are owing to God's grace to where we are today.
Thank you for that, Doc. I'm leafing through the book, and you've written it with sort of sections of your life and sections of your theological content, and also moments in your life. Everyone would love to know how to be W. Franklyn Richardson at this moment in life. You're the pastor of grace and a global ministry. We all have marveled at what you've done. Most of us who started preaching in the 80s and have preached for the last 30 years have been impacted one way or the other by your presence, particularly through the National Baptist Convention. But could you talk to us about how in the book you talk to the younger preacher who's starting out? What is the role of grace in the beginning?
Well,
and how has that shaped your journey?
The thing that I would point to, Doc, is that the shaping formation of my life was an act of grace in that God provided marvelous mentors. I really want to underscore the importance of mentors in the development of a pastor or the development of one who wants to make a career in ministry. There was a time in our denomination, when that was normative, that nobody went into the ministry without having somebody mentoring them and not helping them to find their way, because it never was written in the book how to be a pastor. It's kind of passed on from one generation to another, kind of learned the lessons passed on. And somehow, in many ways, we've gotten away from that today, where our preachers are not treasuring being mentored. And there's some of us who are not willing to mentor. But the point is that it's a function that has left us, in my opinion, weaker than we ought to be. So when you ask me how I am where I am clearly where I am because I was blessed with mentors, men and women, who stepped in and helped me from the time I was in high school, or even before that. My grandfather was a CME pastor, and I used to work with him on the weekends. And then my pastor, James Edward Hamlin, Community Baptist Church in Philadelphia, he took me in a special way. He was in the high school as a counselor, and so I didn't only have his benefit on Sunday, but I had to do the week of school. And then I went to Virginia Union, and A.B. James, who was the president at that time.
Yeah.
He was also, well, he was the dean at that time, and who mentored me. I mean, I remember, I got called to a pastorate at 19 years old, and I'd been pastoring about a year or so, and I had to stop going to undergrad. And Dr. James pulled up at the light one day with me and my wife in the car and said, "Franklyn, come to me, go to my house." And I went to the president's house. He sat down. He said, "You know, you have been successful as a pastor. You've got a good name in this community, but you're gonna always be apologizing the rest of your life for not having a degree." He said, "You got to go back to school." And let me tell you, that was an early intervention, but it was, I don't know how I'd be what I am today without that intervention. So I'm saying the mentoring reality. And then there was T.J. Jemison and Sandy Ray. When I went to New York, Sandy Ray took on his wing because his wife and I, her son, Talmadge Owens, and I were in school together at West Philadelphia High. She found out that, adopted me, immediately cocooned me into the Ray family. And Dr. Ray, you know, I edited and wrote his, not wrote, but edited and put together. He gave me power of attorney, and I went to Gardner Press and put together his book, Journey Through the Jungle.
Journey Through the Jungle.
Yeah, he never saw the book. He saw the galley proofs, but he died in Easter that year that we was gonna bring him back and show him. So he never saw the cover, but it was an honor. So he mentored me. Then T.J. Jemison followed him. And at 32, I was the secretary of the National Baptist Convention following T.J. Jemison, who had been secretary for 29 years.
That's right.
And believe me, it was 10 years before I got to be secretary, even though I had the title. so it was nurturing, mentoring all along. Bill Harvey, who was the foreign mission secretary, I had the privilege of leading the delegation to Ethiopia to feed 1.5 million people. And Bill Harvey gave to me the blueprint of how to rise into greater utility in the National Baptist Convention. So, I mean, it's just been mentor. Gardner Taylor, who, when I was running for president, stepped in and nurtured, soothed my wounds. He called the night I lost that election. He called me and said, "Franklyn, don't be discouraged. There's life after the National Baptist Convention." And
that's right.
He said, "I'm a witness to it, as is Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, "You've joined a great club tonight." I'll never forget those words. So it's that kind of mentoring that has continued to be. Now, at 70 years old, 71 years old, I am now not having mentors, but I feel a heavy burden to be available to mentor other young pastors who are coming into their own. But I would say to you, to answer your question, that the single reason that I am where I am is that I have had the benefit of tremendous mentees. And I had a listening spirit. I was searching for what they were offering, and it has helped me to this very day.
Thank you for that, Doc. One of the sections of your book, you take a critical look at white evangelicalism. The reality is you're writing this book and releasing this book at a time where the white evangelical church has failed Christianity and failed this country miserably. And yet, on our watch, as I'm in my 26th year, started pastoring around 1990, and the reality is my generation of preachers have been impacted by the TBN thing, and something crept in on our watch that has hoodwinked, in some cases, the Black pulpit. And you are one of those voices that has been able to model what Raphael Warnock talks about in his book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church. you know, our own brand of evangelicalism with the social gospel.
Yes.
And those of us that have watched you marvel at your ability to preach the gospel and serve people. Talk to us about that section of your book and what we need to hear about healing that schism in the church and addressing the social gospel.
First of all, from a historical standpoint, I don't know if we're going to, in near time, get reconciled to the white evangelicals.
Okay.
Because it's deeply ingrained into their theology and their sociology. They participated in sanctioning the enslavement of African people. They were co-conspirators to our enslavement. They manipulated the scriptures to make the actions of enslavement acceptable and legitimate. They gave legitimacy to slave owners. They sanctioned their actions and perpetuated the slave ideologies. And even up until this day, they have provided home for white supremacists. They provided home for continual racism. And they do it in the name of Jesus, but it is a Jesus that I know nothing about. It is a Jesus who is foreign to me. And so for me to say that in my time, certainly not in my lifetime, but in the near future, there will be a reconciling of that only if there's repentance.
Gotcha.
Can there be a reconciling of the damage that the evangelical white church has done? And it ain't just the evangelical. You know, racism started in the Catholic Church in the 15th century. Slavery, 15th century. So it's a long place where the church, where the white church has been a co-conspirator to what the racism and the systemic racism that Black people have endured. Now, unfortunately, the evangelicals have had a tremendous resource base. They've had finances and monies, and their monies have provided in recent times entree for the soothing of their conscience. And so they have provided ways in which they have gone aggressively to solicit young, you still there?
I'm here.
Yeah. They've gone out of their way to solicit young Black pastors and make them wear their badge. And what I would say to my colleagues who are young preachers, we have got to see our ministries through the prism of the oppressed that continue to be in our congregations. And we must look for Jesus's word in the pain of the suffering of our people. And so that's what's driven me. I have been driven to read the scripture through the prism of the oppressed and the hope that Jesus provides for that. And so, unfortunately, some of us got seduced by the resources of evangelicals. Yep. Some of us got seduced by the postures of TV. Before it was, TV today is not what it was 20 years ago. It was really seductive. Today, you and I have our own sources to communicate through virtual activities. But back then, it was seductive. And some of our preachers got seduced by that mentality and joined those movements. But I praise God that at the ground level, the Black church has remained faithful to the liberation of African people and have been free to speak truth to power in our society. Now, that doesn't mean it's all the Black churches, but some significant cadre of Black churches in this country of all denominations have been able to remain faithful to the liberation narrative of the gospel. And that is a sign of encouragement. I believe that our young preachers who have maybe slid away from that will find their way back, because these times that we just went through, the things we just saw, the rise of white supremacy, we just saw a resurgence of racism from the highest office of this country. We are called, and we've seen the police kill our sons and daughters on the street. So we're called to go back.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doc. You talk about in the book, there's a theme, witness to grace, and you talk about the role of grace in your own ministry. Can you, and you share a few examples, which example of grace, and we all know how to live in the sunshine, but how we handle the rain and storms really reveal who we are as people. You've got a long, illustrious career, but it's also has some moments of impact, some moments of what outsiders might call failure. How do you process that? And how have you processed that? And how do you process those difficult moments in ministry?
Well, you know, that's one of the things I've tried to make clear in this book, is that I didn't write this book because I had a grace that took me through on smooth seas and windless sail. No. Yeah. The grace showed up in the trials and tribulations of the journey. You asked me let me give you two examples. One is in 1994, I had run for president of the National Baptist Convention after being 13 years. I guess this is one of the things that stands out. 13 years as general secretary. I lost the election in which most people understood to be a breakdown in integrity and honesty on the side of my opponent. Consequently, it was devastating to me because all of the indicators suggested that I was going to win, and in truth, it was end up around 24 votes separated me from the winner, and we had evidence that the night before they went in and sabotaged the computers, and so it was a heartbreaking thing. It was the pits, and so it was a rejection. It was a rejection, and my congregation was there, all that, and I prayed before I ran. I just knew that it was the Lord's will that I would become president of the convention. But the truth of the matter is, as I got older, I understood that God sanctioned me to run, but he didn't tell me I was going to win. because winning with God is different than winning with others or with us. And so when I lost, after years later, it was terrible to deal with. The Lord took all of that and flipped it upside down and gave me success that I could not have realized at that time. An example that might be, I'm chairman of the Conference of National Black Churches, which is the 7 historically Black denominations. I served as vice president under Bishop John Hurst Adams. And one day, so after he stepped down, they elected me to be chairman. And John Bryant, the senior bishop of AME Church, said to me, "Rich," he said, "they rejected you at the National Baptist Convention, but today you are the chairman of all of us." And so, that was a kind of validation that God had not rejected me. God had not dismissed me, but rather God was preparing me for a greater service. And sometimes we have to understand that as pastors, that prosperity does not mean that we're in the will of God, or winning is not God's friend. His son went to the cross. And so we have to be really willing to go to the cross if we're going to be his servants. The second thing I'll point out to you is that I went in Philadelphia. I grew up in West Philadelphia High School. And at that time, that school was guilty of social promotion. And if you go to school, be good, you'll get out. Well, I went to school And I got to the 10th grade. I was working in the hospital, West Park Hospital in Philadelphia. And I came home, and so the doctors found fondness in me, and they even said that if I finished college, they would support my medical school. And so I went back to my counselor at the school and said I want to go to college. And he said to me, Mr. Driven said to me, "You're not college material." And he said, "I think you ought to pick something else." And so that was quite devastating. I wasn't college material because they hadn't prepared me to be college material. And they socially promoted me. I went on, but I wouldn't accept his. I went on to West Philadelphia Community College. I flunked out in the first semester. And, but then I accepted my call to ministry, and my pastor said, "Well, look, why don't you apply to Virginia Union?" And so I applied to Virginia Union, and they found out in the application process that I had a problem with reading. I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't read. And they said, "Well, what we'll do is we'll give you a conditional matriculation. We'll put you in remediation for a year. If you do well, you can stay and finish your degree." So I did. I did do that, and I was able to stay. I graduated, went on to Yale, earned a degree at Yale, went on, earned a DMin, went on around the world with the National Baptist Convention, sit on the World Council of Churches. 35 years later, a kid who had a conditional matriculation to Virginia Union is now the chairman of the board of Virginia Union that signs every degree of a kid who graduates from there. So wow. That's grace.
There it is. Doc, that is what we need to hear. And that is why many of us have agreed to be a part of a collection of pastors. Hopefully you all will know that not only am I doing this, but not many, but a number of my peers are joining collectively in a series of these conversations with Dr. Richardson, because we all are agreed that his voice needs to be heard and his book needs to be read. And so I want to encourage you to get the book, and it is Witness to Grace. And it is a wonderful read, and it is something that I think you will benefit from, particularly if you have a call of ministry on your life. But it's not just about ministers. It is about anybody who's serious about the whole thing. Now, Dr. Richardson, I would like for you to talk to us about landing the plane. You've talked to us about how it took off. Many of us have watched how you flew it. But you've been pastoring for 50 years. And how does it look for those of us who are watching now, thinking about things like retirement, thinking about what the seasoned years look like? What does your book say to us about that? And what do you say? How do we prepare to be like you?
Well, I think that, I would say to anybody, you gotta get up. First of all, you start out pastoring like you're gonna be there the rest of your life. Never pastor like it's an urgent, you gotta get something done urgently. Remember, you're serving a God who will sustain you. And so you have to pastor like you're gonna be, you can't have a sense of urgency to get things done. You gotta pastor like you are going to be there and make your decisions like you're gonna be there. And fortunately, I'm at Grace now 45 years, and that is the way I pastored it. I pastored like I knew I was gonna be there 45 years, because sometimes when we have a sense that we have to be in a rush, we hurt ourselves and we diminish our effectiveness. So at this stage in my life, I've worked hard, I've continued, and I'm still working hard, and I continue to be spread in multiple ways and very active. But I understand that as I come to this season of my life, there'll be a need for the plane to start coming down, lowering altitude. And I've begun gradually doing that. We'll be thinking about succession, and how it happens. And,
Yeah.
you know, I would say to pastors who are in major churches like you are, one of the important things to do is to care about what happens after you're not there.
Wow.
Too many preachers don't care about what happens once they're gone. And that is a misuse, a poor stewardship of what the Lord allowed them to do. We have to care about who comes after us and whether that person can help carry out what you received and what must go forward. We need strong Black institutions. And we can't afford them to be built simply around personality. We've got to create a process and expectation from the pew that there is succession. And because the longer you're at a church, the least likely the church knows how, especially in our denomination, we're not connectional. So it's the least likely a Baptist church knows how to call a pastor, the longer the pastor's been there. Yeah. So you and I have a responsibility to try to create some sense, either by preparing the leadership for your transition, or even participating in getting your successor before you leave. You just gotta care about what's happening after you. Not only is that true at the church, it's true at the university where I'm chairman of the board, it's true at the National Action Network, it's true at the Conference of National Black Churches. We have got to become people who care, who live and care about succession.
Wow, thank you for that. I think that is critical, and we are grateful that you are reminding us in your work about that. Well, we've had a great conversation, and I have said why I think people should read this book. But Doc, I'm just going to ask you to look right in that camera and tell my network why they should get this book.
Well, let me tell you, I think they should get the book because it's an opportunity to have insight into how the grace of God functioned in the life of another. The another was no special person. The another grew up in Philadelphia with scarce resources, had limited academic capacity, but God, by his grace, sustained him and delivered him to a place he never thought he could go. And that is inspiration, not just for the pastor. It's for inspiration for the young person in the pew, for the college student who's trying to make it, for the parents who are struggling to keep their families together. I talk about family. I talk about all the things that come upon life. And so I believe that the person who reads this book can gain some insight and maybe gain some mentoring that I talked about earlier this evening.
Excellent. Well, Doc, I want to thank you. And I'm making a commitment right here. I have 50 associate ministers. And so right here, I'm letting you know now, you all, I'm buying this book for you. So I am buying first 50 myself and make sure that each of you get one. And I want to encourage those of you that are listening to us today, if you are a senior pastor and you have associates, why don't you bless them with this book? Be a blessing and let's help Dr. Richardson reach people, but let's also use his message to be a blessing to others. Listen, I'm Pastor Alyn Waller of the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, and this has been a wonderful conversation with one of the pillars of our National Baptist work, Reverend Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, pastor of the Grace Baptist Church and author of Witness to Grace. God bless you and God keep you is our prayer.
Thank you, Dr. Waller. The Lord keep you strong to do the great work that you're doing.
Bless you, man. Thank you.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is available for purchase. Get your copy today from Amazon,